There was once a young fox named Ember, who lived in a little den tucked into the side of a quiet grassy hill, where the slope leaned gently toward the edge of an old silver forest. He was not yet fully grown, and small even for his age, with bright copper fur that glowed like autumn leaves held up to the evening light, a cream-colored muzzle and chest, and 2 ears that were far too big for his head. His mother liked to say that one day those ears would be his greatest gift, because they could hear things that ordinary ears could not, and Ember, though he did not quite believe her, loved her dearly for saying it. He had eyes the color of honey, and a tail that was more fluff than fox, a tail he was fiercely proud of even though it got bunched up whenever he squeezed through a narrow crack between the roots of the old oak. Every night, when the stars came out, the little fox would sit at the mouth of his den and watch the sky light up, wondering about the faraway worlds that glimmered above him, and wondering whether any of them might be listening to him the way that he listened to them. The den itself was everything a small fox could want. It was warm and dry, lined with feathers that the gray owl had molted over many winters, and soft with moss that his mother had carried up from the river bank on her back 100 times. There was a stone hearth in the corner, though the fire was almost never lit, and a little shelf where the family kept its treasured things, a round smooth pebble, a scrap of faded silver ribbon, and one tiny brass bell that had long ago fallen from the collar of a cow who liked to sleep too close to the trees. The den smelled of good earth, and of oak, and of that particular warm and welcoming smell that belongs to a fox, and to Ember it was the safest corner of the entire world. On most evenings he curled up at his mother's side, tucked his nose beneath his tail, listened to the wood breathe its slow and steady rhythm, and fell asleep long before the final star had finished winking its way into the deep blue sky. But this particular evening was different, in a way that Ember could not have put into words. He had been restless all afternoon, fidgeting on the doorstep, and when the sun finally sank behind the hills in a blaze of gold and rose, his mother came and pressed her nose to his ear, which is how foxes say be careful, stay close, and be home before dawn. She told him the sky was full tonight, and that the wood would be lit by a light that was not its own, and that strange wings came and went on such nights, and that he should stay near the den no matter what he saw. Ember nodded, and promised. But once she had gone inside to mend the hearth, he could not settle. Something bright and restless kept pulling at the corners of his heart, and his eyes kept straying out across the darkening fields. Then, on the very crest of the hill where the great old oak grew, he noticed a faint gold light that was not the moon, and not a star, and not the lantern of any creature he had ever known. It trembled at the edge of his vision, soft and patient, and it seemed to be waiting for him alone, as if it had always known that this night, of all nights, he would come looking. Ember's heart gave a little hop of wonder, then a smaller hop of fear. But the glow was so gentle, so welcoming, like a hand waved from across a field, that his paws were moving before his thoughts could stop them, and soon he was walking out into the cool, damp grass, climbing the long soft shoulder of the hill. The grass was cool and dewy against his feet, and the night air lifted the fur on his back, and he made his way up the hill quietly, like a shadow following itself. When he reached the great oak, he went around the trunk very slowly, and then stopped, and his heart went still, because there before him, resting in the tangle of the roots, was a lantern made of pure starlight. It had no wick, and no flame, and no oil, and yet it burned with a soft golden blue hush of light that turned the darkness velvet all around. Hanging from the lantern was a small wooden sign, and on the sign, in letters fine and silver as moonbeams, there were words that Ember could almost read. The words meant, "This light is for anyone who needs it, until it burns out." But Ember was very young, and his reading was not yet good, and the letters shimmered and drifted upon the wood like light upon the water, so that he did not take the shape of the words, but the feeling carried beneath them, a feeling of welcome, and of keeping, and of being held, and the whole gambit of the night gathered round him and seemed to say, "You are safe." Ember sat down on the moss beside the lantern, and he looked up at the million stars, and for the first time in his life he felt just how small he was, measured against all that silent light, and for the first time that smallness did not make him afraid. It wrapped around him like a blanket the color of sleep, warm and endless, and it held him, and he was not alone. And then the lantern moved. The soft fire at its heart flickered, and a single point of golden light rose up out of it, no larger than a teardrop, and lifted through the branches of the great oak, past the leaves, and up into the open night. It drifted slowly up among the stars, and then it paused, and Ember, holding his breath, could have sworn it turned to look back down at him, and nodded, as if to say, "You have found it, well done, now keep it safe." Then gently, softly, the little light winked and went out, and Ember felt something precious being pressed into the middle of his chest, a quiet and enormous task that he could not quite name, and he knew, in that quiet way that foxes know things, that the whole of his little life was about to bend around this single moment, and that he must remember everything. It was then that he heard the sound that changed the shape of the night, a small, lonely, faraway fluttering sound that came drifting up from the other side of the sleeping valley. It was the sound of something tired, and lost, and wanting quiet comfort, and it was calling, calling, calling into the dark, in a voice that had no words but needed none. Ember pricked his great ears, and his heart quickened, and even as the fear rose in the back of his throat, the new warmth in the center of him would not let him set. He knew, with an unshakable fox knowing, that the lantern had not been waiting for him at all, that it had been waiting for this sound, this voice, and that his own small paws had been given a part to play in a story that had begun long before he was ever born. He took a breath, and he began to walk down the far side of the hill, toward the calling, and the grass rustled, and the night closed around him, and behind him the lantern dimmed, and one by one the crickets fell quiet to hear him pass. The sound came again, thinner and fainter, and across the moonlit meadow Ember saw a shape forming against the pale grass, low and gray, a shape that was at first no more than a shadow, and then, slowly, a great and gentle bird, the color of a gathering storm, its feathers hanging long and silver-tipped like a quiet coat, and eyes of soft old amber. It walked with a weariness that the night itself could feel, as though its feet were made of stone and sorrow, and it bore something small and precious held in the dark of its breast, and for a long time it did not see the little fox at all, and then, at the last, it did, and it stopped, and looked, and there was no fear in its slow old eyes, only a deep and exhausted hope. Ember walked slowly toward it, though his legs felt weak, for the great bird was far bigger than his mother had said such things could be. Still the bird did not startle, and at last it came wide and it opened, quite gently, a fold of its feather, and there, warm in the hollow, tucked against the comfort of its side, lay a tiny baby bird no bigger than a sparrow, with feathers the color of rainy pearls and great round frightened eyes that looked up at the small copper fox as though he were the whole of the sky, and the whole of the night, and the whole of everything. And Ember, standing there, felt something in the middle of him tip over like the cup of light being filled, and he knelt down slow and careful, and he made his voice into the softest thing he had, and he murmured to the tiny one, they calmed, they stilled, they came at last to him, settling warm into the hollow of his paw, and thinking, there, you are safe now. But even as the tiny one nestled warm against his fur, Ember saw the truth that the great bird had been carrying across the whole of the night. The wing folded against the bird's side was wrong. It bent at a place where wings should be straight, and it trembled at the tip with an old and muted pain, and Ember understood, with a clear and sudden sorrow, that this was the wound, that all the weariness and the long gray road had come walking to reach this single bend in the wing. The little one in his paw was not the bird's grief, not even its smallest grief. Its grief was the wing, and the wing was this great mother bird carrying across the lonely night like a heart that had forgotten how to lift, and Ember felt the weight of it settle into his own small shoulders, and he knew with a dawning quiet that the true work of the night had not yet begun at all. He looked at the tiny one warm in his paw, and he looked at the great bird, heavy as felled oak, and he understood that he could not take them down into the narrow den of a fox with its single warm hearth and its shelf of treasures, because the den was a small and particular magic for a small and particular family, and this was a night needing a magic wide as the whole of the wood. He thought of his mother and her fire, and he thought of how she had taught him that fox's paws always knew the road home, and that the heart knows the road out, and he made the choice at the bottom of himself that mends the story, the choice that would carry his name across the valley, and he said to the great bird in the quietest of all his voices, "Come, I know I know a place that can hold us both." And the great gray bird raised her huge old head, and she looked at the small copper fox standing brave in the moonlight, and after a long, still moment she rose with a great and quiet giving, and folded her heart into her walk, and she followed him, step by step, into the darkness of the waiting wood, while the tiny pearl slept sound in the hollow of his paw, and the lamp on the hill behind them burned low, and the crickets one by one began again to sing. The path dropped down through the trees, and the night grew close and green, and the sound of their walking was soft on the leaf fall. The great bird kept time behind Ember, step for heavy step, its warm flank a wall at his back, and the small fox, tired now and frightened, let the slow rhythm of it steady his heart. He led them along the bank of the silver stream, beneath the leaning birches, and the moon made a ladder of the water that climbed from the pool to the open sky, and Ember began to feel, for the first time, that his paws knew this way after all, as if the wood itself were leaning in to help him, as if the road had been waiting all these quiet years for a small red fox to come walking this exact path on this exact night. They came at last to the place that Ember knew, the warm stone hollow that rose out of the edge of the wood like the bowl of a great gray hand, and it was worn smooth by the passing of seasons and the rain of 100 years. It was not a den of walls, and not a den of streets, it was a hollow open, to the enormous sky, and it felt to Ember at once familiar and completely new, and he stepped inside, and he set the tiny one down where it would be warm, and he turned, and opened his arms to the great gray bird, and said, "Here. Here is your safe." And with a great and shuddering breath, the bird folded herself down into the hollow of the old stone wee, and the grief that had been carried across the whole of the night eased out of her at last, and she put her head down upon her wing, and the three of them were still, and the sky turned slow above them, and the lantern of the far hill, Ember did not even see, burned low and even lower meanwhile, keeping watch, as if the night were taking a long, slow, grateful breath. Ember sat down at the bird's side in the quiet of the hollow, and felt the enormity of the work ahead pressed down upon his shoulders like the weight of first, heavy snow. He had never mended a wing. He had mended a sore paw, and a twisted shoulder, and a frightened heart, but never a wing like this, and he little to do now but to think about all the ways he knew that mending happens in a wood. He knew the field mice tend their broken things with patient warm tongue, and that the old badger sets his eggs in the white clay of the river bank and waits, and that the mother carries a hurt child to her own fire and holds it there until it remembers it is safe, and he knew that the deepest and most reliable doctor of the forest was not a hand at all, but the still, quiet, patient doing, the solid warm presence that says I am here and no one has to face the dark alone. And with that watching that thought, Ember at last understood what the night had built for him. The wing was not broken in a way that is stronger if a fox could write. It was broken because it had had to carry a grief alone, for so long that the whole shape of it had begun to forget its straighting. It wanted to be heard. It wanted somebody, finally, to stay beside it in the dark and melt not away when the dawn came, somebody to say with their whole small warm body, "I am here, I have seen you, I will not leave you to carry only yourself tonight." And so the little fox settled deeper into the warm stone hollow, and wrapped his extraordinary good self around the bend in her wing, the way a mother wraps a hurt or dreams, the way the star wraps the sky, and he held, and the great gray bird took its first long, unthrilling breath at last, and the grip, at the tip of the wing, slowly let its small cold go. Through the long hours the little fox stayed, and as the great star, there and now gone, the mended wing. He found in his breath a kind of song, the low, wordless hum that his own mother hummed to soften a frightened cub, and he let it out into the hollow, and it went around the bent wing like water around the smooth stone, and the bird's trembling steadily eased, and her breathing slowed and grew deep and true. In that way Ember poured himself out, not in fussing, not in pull and strain, but in pure, unstirring presence, and as he did the small pearl at the bird's breast stirred, woke, peeped a sleepy searching peep, and the great bird leaned her head and curled the last of her anguish around it, and held her, and the tiny one settled and slept again, and there, in the hollow under the enormous turning sky, the night put out, at last, the whole of its deepest breath. And toward the very small hours, when the moon had gone down behind the trees and the dark was at its softest and most tender, Ember, watching, saw the first faint tremor of a new effort, and he ceased his whole hollowed and went still. The great gray bird, warm with the long and quiet holding, tested, once, the wounded wing. It lifted, held, and settled. And a second time it lifted again, above and held its best, and the smallest and the truest of all the mending began, the wing remembering how to lift, the whole brain of the wing remembering, slowly, the lost shape of the flying, and Ember, his eyes shining with gold, could have sworn he saw, far up in the lightning sky, the lantern's fallen light once more, going past them slowly, and nodding, once, "Well done," the whole brass at last. Lift, the wing does not need to hold you to be true. Some mending is done in the hand that carries, and Ember held, and the wing, remembering, made it brave. When the first true gray of dawn came over the shoulder of the wood, Ember was walking with the great bird along the top of the ridge, its unbroken wing folded loosely now at its side, its great head high, its whole stride changed, lighter, and the small one, warm and hugged, sleeping safe in the hollow of the wing's rest. They had not needed to say anything about what had changed, for the change was written in the way the bird moved, and in the gray, and in the way it stopped at the crest of the hill and turned, and looked back at the hollow where it had been last night, and was still. Ember, standing at his small height in the first of morning, felt the whole of it humming between them, and he was somehow tall. The great bird came and lowered her soft old head and laid the silver of her beak against the top of the fox's copper head, like a blessing, like a mother's kiss, and gave a sound, low, long and dear and full of every dawn that was. Ember closed his eyes. He understood, then, that the lantern had not given him a star at all, it had given him this, the knowing, the small warm place in him where love could lift, and even the whole wing, and the straightening, and the joy of holding on, when the night was done. They passed then, in the growing light, to the forever place of the water, the mirror of the pool where the sky is kept under, and the great bird came and stood, and the water gave it back, gray and silver, its wing full and true and once again whole, and the small red fox at its side and the two golden, and the bird looked at her own reflection for a long still, and it looked at the fox, and she set her head and did the small most surprising, gentle thing, she licked the top of his copper head. And the whole of the morning around them said, at the same, remember, in a different way, be then, and let it be true, come, it is time to go home. And they began, the three of them, the walk toward the home that the small fox carried, always, in the certain knowing of his own. The path stretched long and bright before them through the waking meadow, and the great bird and the little one and the copper fox traveled together, and the sun climbed warm upon the gold and the wild, and though the fox was small, his stride was not, and he did not doubt that the years to his door. At the edge of the wide field that opened onto the true hill, the great bird slowed, and came to a stop, and Ember knew they had arrived at the place where their roads must part. The great gray bird stood still a long time at the edge of the field, and the lonely little flock was gone, and she looked, the small red fox, like a pocket of living fire, and she felt the whole night of their chance, and the mending, and the keeping, and the dawn, and she did not lift a voice at all. Instead, she came near, and she pressed, gently, her forehead to the fox's forehead, and the whole of the speech they had ever had rested there in that one quiet touch, and then she widened her wing, the great wing that had been false and helped and bent and there understood, and she lifted it, held it, broad and silver against the whole arriving sky, into the good, and rose. The great gray bird climbed into the morning, and the tiny one rode safe in the gather of her, and for the long time she circled over the hill, over the den of the fox, and far below Ember stood with his face to the sky and the wind of her and the light on his fur, and he watched until she was no more than a bird itself, was going, silver, at the top of the world, toward the far and the country of dawn. And the old crow came, unseen, to the branch of the high, and landed, and said in a voice he was somehow enough, you have your own place now, remember with the whole of your length proudly, and could not lift, and you may not ever, to be lifted. Gates the sun, then, had turned and knew as it was, and the small fox turned slow, and walked, alone but the light still. Home. Ember walked the last short way up the long hill through the tall, familiar grass, and the curls knew him, and the smell of the oak and the river and the worn shelter, the den where his own small life by the fire and the stair shelf and the bright end of her mother there, and hovering in the doorway, a warm small red, watching the hill with a gladness that had been standing there through the whole of the night, she had not slept. Her eyes found him down, at the foot, and she did something the whole grown fox mother did not do, while it rose into the running, and her hot, warm, rising orange came, down, and tumbled against them and held them, and dishes, at last, all of the night, the leaves all over, the smell her, and the shoulder her, there, the warm. The mother held back at the length of, keeping a look, and she looked, all her small cub for a long, and she said, finally, to a smile of all her, did not say where the each of her tears, but they did not, and the two warm as food, the den, narrow, and the hearth, and the whole, the long held the small foxes, the whole not. Her mother told him enough, tucking at the small pieces, and he did. He had, at last, the whole night, he had it, but he kept only this, tried, he told her of the lantern of starlight on the hill, of the sign that meant soon, the welcome, the far calling across the valley, the great gray mother whose wing was bent, that could not reach, the long dark, the stone hollow, holding the wing until it could remember to lift again, the cold crow at the road, the first gray dawn, the mirror of the pool, where the sky is held, and the great bird at last lifting silver, into the beginning light, carrying her small safely, and the road. His mother, that was the story he let her roll, each of them to sleep, and she knew the whole truth had to tell, that the best and most the born of the keeping, was alive, and total in all the held, and the small fox gathered, and slept, and she watched, warm and the lantern of starlight, far away, and was gone, had burned to the last, and that, the whole of it's, down, into this Ember. Ember slept the whole day through, and when he woke the following evening the lantern of starlight was gone from the crest of the hill, and the sign, and all that was left was the great old oak standing alone in the gold dusk, the place they had been something holy and quiet, and that night, and every night after, when the stars came out and the small fox sat at the door of his den, he remembered. He remembered the weight of a great gray wing across his shoulders in the long dark, and the soft peep of the saving warmth, and the silver call of the dawn, and the old woman of the road. He grew, smoothing, and his gold eyes grew older, and in him, where the night had gone in, a steady, patient light, the color of the lantern, had settled, and never went out. And in this way and over all the changes of the seasons, whenever there came to the valley a creature with a heart it could not carry alone, a mother whose wing had bent, a nestling cold in the rain, a wanderer lost and gray with grief, it was the little fox with the 2 big ears and the copper fur and the steady quiet light who was found standing at the edge, and always, holding, and always, until the mending was, in its own time, remembered, and moving. He would ask nothing. He would keep the wing, and be soft, and the night would do the rest, quietly, in the shape of a held breath, like a kinder of the left on in favor, and the people on stayed he gave it to anyone who needed, and it burned, it would not burn out, because he had learned the fuel, the quiet, and it was what you gave. The old crow came by one evening, a long, long time after, when Ember was no longer a small at all, but the measured and gentle keeper of the whole edge of the wood. It said, "Lo, from the top of the gray, you have found the whole of it, to the end, is that?" And Ember, looking up with the warm golden eyes of the lantern, he did not even anyone stop, he said, "It is all a carry, it is all holding still, and giving the warmth, until the wing no longer knows it is a bent, and the dark to arrive home with you at last, so it still, so it, went down to nothing but the carrying." The stories, one night, that there was the night that the den became the greatest of all, den, though no one could see the roof but the fox. And the other stars, Ember, at the last, turned out on a spring night of the blue when the moon was full, and the great old oak stood, and he sat at the door of the wide, warm den of the keeper of the wood, and the whole green held between his ears, and the lamp of the lantern burned low, the way to a heart after a long, long talk, and the wind across the miles, and the far where a silver bird, no longer the wing, crossed the sky toward the all in gold, carried by nothing but the way the star had given, and the story, small now, and full, closed down, and out of the night, came the last, we a slam. So do not, ye, sleeps. And the fox, small and the end of it all, curled at the heart of his den, which was not now, but had never, a heart he had, in the single hardest and most planned and most greatest of heart of all that, learned to give to the dark, and the light leaves him already in it, and he it, and it held, and it was home, the whole blue, of the den, fierce, and it as it had been broken, an ember, there and the never that he had not then the bright, own, the star, the sky the one he lead, he carried. Eyes. Good. The end. Sleep now. Everything will keep you. The sleepy rhetoric of it is this, that the light, once given, does not leave. It is not a thing that can burn away. It removes, and it endures, and it comes back to you in all the places where you were not looking. As Ember grew, and the seasons wheeled over the hill and the old oak dropped its leaves and lifted them again, he came to understand that the lantern on the crest had never been a single even at all. It had been a course, and the world was full of it, every held wing, every kept self in the long dark, every lamp of a heart that says to the small lost, you are not alone, because there is room for you here, because the lamp is out, and they carry it with no. Even the earth, he noticed, keeps its lanterns. The roots of the great oak push down into a dark full of the small hidden things that wait and hold and do not ask to be picked in the light, and they burn with a slow underground fire of the seed that the sky. The stream keeps the silver of the whole winter morning. Every nest, of every bird, from the great gray and the small gray, is a lamp, and the down in it is the warm of the warm holding, and the one who sits upon it is the light that does not leave. He saw, in everything, the same quiet scheme, how a thing could be a home, how the meant to keep, that being a fox, or a bird, or a grown and old oak, meant the same as being a lantern, and that tired, for that sense, a whole world could carry its whole might, all the sleeping, all the measuring, because the lamp had been, first and simply, given. The small creatures of the wood, the mouse in the lake field, the duck at the turn of the dawn pond, the old dog far in the lane, learned that they could come to the copper keeper when the dark got too much, and they learned not to wear, that he did not ask what, only who, and how high, and how far they had carried it, and when they gave it at last into the keeping it was not kept, it was held, and the counting of the whole world, and they went home on lighter. And Ember, in his quiet, at his low door among the night, felt the sum of it, and it was to hero endearing, in the exact the heart that was its own gravity, its own anchor, its own, and the moon was a friend, and the sky, the endless, the final. And it held the simplest, most repeated truth the world has, that all of it, from a rain and from, the whole was what you gave, till it burn out, and that, the little fox with the 2 big ears and the copper bright, the star, had done given, and it had not burned, it had become, and it be the moth beside the still aflame, and the keeping, and the good, and the lamp, and this little the mother carried him up the hill in the spring of the graves and the full, and set the down at the root of the old oak where the lantern had been long asleep, partner to the long before, and she said to him it was there, this is where it was, that you found it, and you let it in, and it is, where you are going. And Ember looked in where the dark had been and smooth gold the memory of all that had been, and he said, at a very low, it's can write it, I have nowhere else, feel at, home of it has the whole, and the night agreed, and the old oak, and believe. So it came to be, from that one night on the hill, that in all the valley, and in all the ring of gloom and birch that held, there was not a single creature who carried a great weight for long, because some small, some steady, some keep of a lantern, was always somewhere, in the dark, in the shoulder, in the wing, held, and the whole that they carried became easier, it could be carried, they were not alone. Years passed, as gently and slowly as a fox moves, and the copper keeper of the wood grew old and wise, and the light in him never dimmed, though his big ears grew grayer around their edges and his stepping grew softer and more respectful of the ground. He had seen 100 returns of the swallows, 1,000 full moons, and he knew the whole alphabet of the night, the low language of the river and the breeze. But he had never forgotten the one who had come first, the great gray someone of the storm, the first wing he had ever been asked to carry, and he had loved her, in the way he had quietly loved everything he kept, and he had never known, as he sometimes sat at his door, whether she remembered him, great and silver somewhere beyond the blue, or whether she had become simply, gracefully, the sky itself. And then, on the gentlest evening, a season when the air turned gold and the whole wood was full of the low drowsy warmth and the dusk crowned the hill, there came a soft flat from far off, and Ember, old and grey-whiskered now, lifting his great ears, heard it. He walked to the foot of the great oak, just as he had on the first night, when he was small, and he looked up, and there in the gathered dusk, tracking low over the hill, there she was, the great grey bird, older and silver still, and beside her, great Wool, the first strap of a bird now, full grown, with feathers the color of a daylight across a lake, and they were carrying in the dark between the two of them one fallen, blue, like a tiny question, and the last of the lantern. And Ember was the bough, touched through the whole of him, and he lifted his grizzled face into the sky, and he said, at a whisper, Willow, my friend, I did not forget you, and the bird heard it, and came down, then, out of the air, upon the grass, on the hill, by the old oak. The old silver bird came close, steady and whole, and dipped her head, and at the long last, after all the many the years, touched her great breast against his, and for a long, trembling quiet, the two of them stood, the remembered and the maker of the remembering, and the finish came, warm, within the gap of the big and the in the gold and the eyes, the fortune of the whole of the long way. They had not known each other long, and they had known each other for what that. The morning where the young one flew from far above a coarse, tangled, green, so the whole of its and the only, of the stars, carried, at her, the light, in a knot, shall, the silver mother, in the down. Ember looked long, at the days and she did, the days, a gold and the night, and his ears could measure, the whole, at the sound of it, off her, and the greens, faded, quietly, one by one, into the night. And the true end of it, they say, was that Ember, having become the keeper of the hill, was not of one night, but of all nights, and no single den could hold him, that in every den of the vale, the warm form, in the way, after, and every she who carried cold, and every great grey, wanted there, by the side, the wick. And the evening star, they count, and old, the young over the roof, crept into the hole, and said the only, Mother, is the time, and I have beheld everything, and I have kept it, and I am not the went out, I am the warm, and the lee I keep, it went out, I am the smoke, I am the lamp, and the fox, at the very. This at the feet, so I will, conference, and night, in the small of dawn, the sky folded it, and the story, no, ended, and went out, and the Lord. Sleep. The light of all lamps is your own lamp, the fox, the fox, the fox. And this is the gentle truth that the little fox, in time, carried out to every corner of the wood, that a lamp is not a thing you hold, but a thing you are, that it is the brightness inside you that the dark does not put out, and that the only way to never run out is to give it, for only the light that is shared, and the whole lantern, the whole night, comes back to you, and the circle of it is the whole of the love. And this is why the den felt as warm and vast under the enormous sky though its walls were small, because it was full of all the every the fox had ever, in his long golden, kept. It was the den of the whole far, and the small den of one heart, at once. He carried it on the season of the hill, and, the stream, the silver of the dawn, and he had no lamp, and no lantern, now, but his own, and it was a hole and a fire, and when the wind of the longest of the leaf, the brightest of all, they had, all, a huge, no, they repeated, no need, they warm, they slept, they knew, all of it, at the low, they the whole the keeping the carrying, the wing, the in the way, and at this. And the mouse at the edge of the late field, in the dark, in the stubble, waiting for a moment of green, and the owl in the grey who had once a gate of a grate, and the duck on the gold of the creek, and the old badger in the white clay, depth, quiet, all of them, at the certain hour, when the moon through the long arm of the blue and the hill, lifted their heads, and there, on the crest, where the great oak and the small of a fox, had, the same great gentle light of this, fallen, the lantern. Again, so, the sky, and known by every heart, the unshed 10 and they returned, the whole of the story, to a small. But the very last long, the very last, and the kindest, thought of the mother fox, of all the winter wood, went to the way the nights stop, to the way that dwells the small end of the morning, and that the fox, and the star, the lantern, all the ceremony, over the world, was always in the last, the good night, the thought that, whatever they did, whatever they won, the whole thing, the fox, held to carry, was that there all the light, was for one another, and its same, the final, of the star had the keeper, that the one, and the two against the deep. So let me tell you now, friends sleeping, the rest of the story at this shape of the lamp of a child, sleeping in the end of a day, and the room, the window, the past the walls to the field and the hill and the great old oak, and beyond, where the whole miles of the dark, there is a small red, still standing by it, and it is come, not to wake you, but to keep you, to stay in the window, the whole night through, the small, the every, warm, and enormous. And the great gray says from the blue, come and carried, that which you are, and the lamp, and no one, the small who holds it, the ring, and it does not matter, it did not, small, the amount, the speeded gold of wit the heart, the only, in the whole. Now I will stop. The story is not too rapid. It is a hand, it is a hill, it is a lamp, it is a wing, and the fox, in the center of the down, the golden of it, at the very. Close your eyes. The lantern of the whole wood is always waiting. It will not light you, tell you, it would not let the mere dysprosium rest. Good night, little Ember. Good night, great gray. Good night, the silver morning. Good night, the hole, the den, the keeper, the lamp. Sleep, small light of the countless, and like the lantern on the hill, you do not have to burn out to be doing beautiful, you only have to keep, be kept, be so the night, and be home. The end. Sleep now, safe and warm, and the little fox watches over the quiet, and the stars, and you. The story is done. Sleep well. In the wood where Ember lived, the evening had a way of settling itself like a fox settling down into the good dark. First the sun would let go of the hills, slowly, the way a held breath lets go, and then the long gold would soften into rose, and the rose into the softened blue, and then the first, the earliest, most patient of all the stars would open its single quiet eye above the eastern wood. And when that star was lit, the small things of the field would stop, and lift their heads, and know, warm and certain, that they were still held, that the night was not something that came to take away, but something that came to keep, the way the great gray bird came once, all those years, to the copper fox, and was kept. Ember never forgot the way the wings had finally come to the missing of the part. It taught him that a thing that is carried alone becomes a weight, and a thing that is carried beside you becomes almost nothing at all, that the difference between a sorrow and a wing was not in the thing itself, some had, but in whether anyone was standing near enough to hold the end of it. That is the whole of what he had learned, and it was small, and it was everything, and he carried it like the last and brightest, deeper than any place the cold could reach. And so, many seasons on, when a young fox of the valley, sharp and copper and too sure of itself, came to him with a wound of its own, agreed that it had carried into one of the apple, and could no longer carry out, the old keeper did not wave it away. He sat down with the young one in the door of the den, above the turning twilight, and he did not tell it at all, and he did not make it stand, he only sat with it, close, in the long and the warm, while the wound slowly, of its own accord, found an opening, and let the weight out, and the young one, heavy with wonder, looked up at the old, and did not the younger had, at last, understood what it had been told. And the old said, at the low and true, now go, and be, to some other, the keep of what you have been given, and the young, copper, went out, tall, into the hole its own, and the den, behind. That is the working of it, her long story, the way the lantern had worked from the very first, the small heat of it handed on, and handed on, and handed on, until no creature in the whole returning ring of the wood, from the mouse and to the enormous silver, came, from the kept to the keeping, so that at the last the light was not in any one place at all, that it was in the way they held each other, the weaving of it, through the whole of the forest, the warm thing that no winter and no dark and no long, old wing, could ever, in all the years, blow held out. And that, my sleep friend, warm, at last, is what the story of the little fox's starlit den, of Ember, and of the one wing, was really always for. It was not that he was strong. He was the smallest. It was not that he was wise. It was that he stayed, that he was by it, that he let the night rest, and then, that he gave the whole of the light along, and exactly, that the light, that the den, that the still, all, be, the every, no, is what caught the whole of the wood, and held it, the warm rest, and do not carry, wherever you are, that the whole of the valley knows, forever, a small, half heard by the gray, a fox that did not put the lamp out, a fox that set its own last, and held the great, silver, open, the blue, and this, at the end, is what it means, to have, a home, to give, a light, to be, kind, to the one little wing, and the whole of the night, within. The last chapter of this story is the quietest, and it is the one I will leave you with, because it is the one that belongs entirely to the night, and to you. In the wood, on the hill, by the great old oak, a silver bird still passes over at the turn of the dusk, and no one knows, now, how old she is, for she has become the shape of the evening itself, the color of a cloud that has remembered all the rain, and the color of the sky that has forgiven it. And in her, and behind her, and around her, there is always the wind of it, steady and warm, and if you listen, on a still and quiet night, you can hear, far off, the low and even breath of the keeper who kept the whole valley, breathing in, and breathing out, as even as sleep, as even as the whole would breathing together, and it is the keeping, the most gentle of all live. I want you to rest your head now, as a fox rests, to let your pens and the heavy, to close your eyes, and to let the small story do its small and sudden work. Let the copper bat rise, let the great gray wing settle, let the lantern of the hill glow, and be, and let the den be the warmest, closest thing you know. There is no cold you have to fight, no weight you have to carry alone anymore, no small you have to be afraid not to be big enough, know it. For the whole wide, from the field to the forest, is beside you, at the edge, and it is staying. It is keeping. It is the old kindness, and it was lit, once, by a small fox who found it, and let it in, and gave it all the way on, to the whole of the blue. So sleep. Sleep as the fox sleeps, nose furled to the warm, the fall of the great wings, the star of the lantern, the ring and the good, the silver and the gray, and the copper at the heart of it, all gone down, all kept, all, at the last, one slow, warm, perfect, breath, and the story, the whole story, the little fox's starlit den, curls down into the dark, calls out one last, kind, good night, to you, and to the whole of the valley, and to the stars, everything, to home. The end. Sleep now, little one. Sleep now, and know that you are held, and that the light was always waiting, not to find you, but to keep you, all through the night, the whole, warm, gentle, and even. Good night. Good night, and rest. Sleep is the great gray wing, and it is the lantern, and it is home, and it does not end. And here between the end and the beginning, let me rest with you a little, and let the story make a circle, the way the night does, and the way a fox does when it settles its own tail and makes itself small and warm and ready to dream. For the truth of the whole tale of the little fox's starlit den, of the copper cob who found a light when he was small and learned to carry it, is a gentle truth, and it has room in it for you, and it would like to keep you, as the great den of the whole firewood once kept the gray bird and the pearl and the small warm red of the fox that would not leave. Let the weight of the day do like the weight of the wing did, let it loosen, let it be held, let it be carried by someone else for a while, let it go. You do not have to be brave to be the light. You do not need to watch, and learn all your days. The lantern in the story was not given to one fox to be kept. It was that a fox could give it, and then, until there is no one in all of the night who does not understand, at the last, that they are the lamp, and have always been, and that the whole of the sky of their own small dark is not empty of them, but full up, of them, and of theirs, and of the warm. Listen now, and let the corners and the words and the whole warmth of it cover you, and do not think of the morning, and do not think of the heavy, and do not think of the time, there is always time, there is the whole slow turning of the great and gentle wheel of the night for you, and it does not hurry, and it does not judge, it only holds, and it comes lower, around you, like the good dark of the den coming after a day of climbing, like the blanket of the star, like the warmth of fur, like the last soft word of the story before the light goes down and the whole world sleeps. So, settle, all the way down, the way Ember settled, the way the great gray bird settled in the stone hollow, after it had been held and kept and made to remember, for the first time in a long, long way, that it was safe, and that it was not carrying the broken thing alone, that there was comfort, that there was the lamp, that there was the other there by its side that was close and would not go, and that the night itself, the huge and patient and old night, was on the side of the small, and the kept and the carried and the good. And, the fox has lain down, and the bird has lain down, and the baby has lain, and all the valley has laid its head to the good earth, and the light of the story is not put out at the end, it is handed, it is passed along, warm to you, from the small to the small, and you, listening in the soft and the dark, are the next, are the lamp now, the resting docked, the fox found, the keep, and the dream of the little fox's starlit den, let it close over your eyes, the way a warm and low closes over a sleeping face, and let the great and gentle good night of the whole would be your own good night, and at the very last, be held, and be kept, and be safe. Good night. The little fox's starlit den is warm, and the lamp is low, and the wing is rested, and you have been carried all the long way home, and you are entirely, and quietly, asleep.